I'm spending 2 hours outside every day. Very exciting stuff. Let's get right into this. The point of this, the reason why this was one of my 12 energetic experiments is because I've noticed that very often when I'm frustrated, when I feel like I'm lacking clarity, one of the best things that I can do is to leave the home. So go outside, co-regulate with nature, watch trees dance, listen to insects chirp. Being out in nature for me really removes the cortisol from my body, and it also gives me something to focus on that also creates space for my mind to wander. So there's a lot of creativity accessible to me when I am outside as opposed to when I'm inside or when I'm even actively thinking about anything. I am really happy that this is the experiment to follow April's because April was a lot. Let's move into the process. This is a pretty simple one. The 2 hours don't have to be consecutive. However, I think it'll be easier for me in general to just try and get it done in one session. And I prefer to be outside in the morning. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start waking up earlier than I normally do and try and do my 2 hours outside. When I had originally thought about this experiment, one of the things that I was wondering is like, am I allowed to bring my phone? And I just came to a decision, which is, yes, I'm allowed to have my phone, but I'm allowing this within the rules made up by me, by the way, because I also trust myself to uphold the integrity of my original intent. Will I be wearing sunscreen? I'm thinking sometimes. I don't know why, but I did feel compelled to share that. But that's all I'm gonna say about that. Actually, I don't wanna be a sunscreen truther right now. I don't have the capacity. As I was saying, my original intention was to ride my bike as the majority of this process. However, can you see this? Hold on, is it in there? Yeah, I'm currently in a boot. This is a new development. This is less than a week old, fresh off the presses, okay? So riding my bike is no longer really an option. It also is not fun to walk, so that also kind of eliminates the way that I had originally intended to interact with being outside. Something about being outside evokes in me movement, right? So most of the plan that I had around this 2 hours outside involved me doing some form of movement, walking or biking or diving. And now with this situation, I have to rethink how this is gonna work. I mean, reading outside still works and I can drive to parks and then sit in those parks. That's all we have to say, right? Yes. Hello. Let's get into the recap. So let's start with changes to the process. There were no big changes. It wasn't a very strict process. So what ended up happening is that I mostly did morning walks or sits because I was injured and so it was not very fun to walk. But I would come to sometimes this place and I would just sit and journal or read during the mornings. When I was able to start walking again, like comfortably, I would do like a 1 hour walk in the morning and then a 1 hour walk in the afternoon, just to kind of spread it out a little bit more. What was the hardest part of this experiment? Can you guess? It's my injury. Yeah. So the hardest part of this experiment was actually just dealing with my injury. Emotionally, it kind of took me out because there were many plans I had, diving related, but also just life related, that I had to pause because I wasn't as mobile. I just wasn't really able to move around in the way that I normally have access to. It did rain a lot in May, and so there were also aspects of like trying to be outside with the cast on, and it's like, okay, do I wrap it? Do I just have like wet toes? Just things like that. So really there was nothing too hard about being outside for 2 hours every day. It was mostly working around my injury. The most surprising thing about this experiment was actually how it filtered into other parts of my life. I feel like I became extremely effective not productive, but effective. And for me, the difference between those two words is productivity is mostly about getting as much done as possible, whereas effectiveness has this like ruthless priority to it, where I focused solely on the activities that were like highest leverage that actually moved the needle towards my goals. I felt for a second that I could see with distance how much the act of being busy or doing a lot was like really wrapped up in my identity. During this month, I let a lot of that peel off. And there's still more integration required. Next, let's get into what I learned and felt. There are two things that came up over and over again throughout this process. The first is that the fact that I am in the goo. So what do I mean by the goo? If you think about a caterpillar's transformation into a butterfly, the caterpillar like first goes into a chrysalis, and then within that chrysalis is literally dissolved into a goo until it re-solidifies as a butterfly. I am deep in the throes of some kind of transformation, and not to be dramatic, but I am disintegrating. I feel like I'm being disintegrated. I feel also like I'm becoming, but I just don't know like where that is going. I don't know why now, and I have no clue how long it's going to take, though my intuition is saying maybe through all of 2025, I'm just going to be in this goo. And what this like process is teaching me, or what I've decided to glean from this process, is like the process of trust, the process of surrender. Because the truth is, I'm not going to think my way through this. I just have to like experience this thing. And that leads into the second thing that I learned, which is how to be without an agenda. So obviously I've been sitting with these trees, and it feels like a wisdom that I'm experiencing like through osmosis is this concept of just being without having this grand agenda that I'm always trying to piece together or storytell. And what I mean by that is a tree exists to survive. That's the thing that a tree is attempting to do, whether it's storing energy, whether it's photosynthesizing, whether it is communicating with its neighbor or the mycelia. A tree exists to survive. Now, as far as I know, trees aren't trying to figure out why they want to do that. They're not seeking some kind of grand meaning behind their existence. They are simply existing and doing the actions that feed into that existence. Now, please understand, I know that as humans with prefrontal cortexes, we cannot help but make meaning. Meaning from the circumstances we experience or the emotions that we have. There's not really a possibility, unless you have a very particular type of stroke, for you to exist without narrative or without building narrative. But what has been valuable about my time learning from nature is understanding that there is actually a threshold of utility around making meaning. And once we pass that threshold, it's diminishing returns and sometimes actively harmful. I think a valuable example of this is that I have always been drawn to writing. Literally, since my sister taught me how to hold a pencil, I've been making stories or poems or odes because I've just always felt compelled to do so. I just want to. And that's enough. When I say how to be without an agenda, what I'm getting at is sometimes you're just pulled to do something, and that in and of itself is valid. I do think that we're currently at a place in time in human society that has taught us that in order to be valid, in order to be real, a thing has to have some grand reason behind it. Sometimes you're just pulled to do a thing. Now, sometimes you just have a pull. You just feel called to do something. And that alone is holy. That is divine. That is something perhaps bigger than yourself. But you don't need like an entire fucking story and justification for that feeling in order for it to be valid. Where I think storytelling and meaning making is useful is actually in building and implementing the systems that allow you or support you in following that urge and following that pull. But there is a line. But I do genuinely believe that there is a point in the process in which trying to justify a pull or a desire by trying to fit it conceptually into some kind of story or framework is not useful anymore. So yes, there is a threshold where meaning making is valuable, where self-determination is valuable. But past that threshold, I just don't think it's worth it, man. Look, an essay is loading about this where I can kind of expand more on this idea. But for now, that's what I'm going to leave you with. Okay, so in terms of what I'm bringing forward from this experiment, I'm going to do a quick story time. So in 2020, I was going through a lot, obviously as the majority of the world, but there were also some like personal things happening. And I recognized that I was trying hard to numb myself. And so I implemented this thing, which I called the silent hour, where I wasn't really allowed to do anything. I could like watch my ceiling fan spin. I could walk. What I was trying to do with that silent hour was create space to feel and to remind myself that I can handle sensations that come with emotions without dying, basically. So this experiment felt very similar to that silent hour, and I really value creating space to do nothing. I don't know if it's always going to be an hour, but I'm definitely going to implement a version of that silent time every single day just to fully attend to the present moment, to the sensations in my body. And I think that it's going to be really valuable for me. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tune in for June's energetic experiment. And if you want the process documents for all the experiments I've done so far, as well as the one coming up, you can join the Energy Squad, which is linked below. Feel free to check out this video where I share a 4-step framework to understand what you truly want and amplify that in your life. Okay, bye. See you in the next one.